Welcome, everybody. Patriots Lament Radio, episode 453. On this 4th of July, sort of, kind of. We've been talking about renaming it Independence Day because there's not a lot of independence left. And certainly not a lot of independence to celebrate. But there are a lot of other things to celebrate. So let's jump right on into it. Corey and I watched Jeff Berwick's Dollar Vigilante Coronavirus Special Edition Get Out of Dodge Summit this last week. And we wanted to go through some of the highlights from that, and then get off into more bizarre American news. So, regarding the summit, there were like four major themes. There was basically, where would you go? Like, where would you go to and how would you get there? That was kind of theme number one. Number two was things that you need to do before you leave. Basically making sure that when you leave, you're actually ready. And then number three was, once you get to your location, and that location doesn't necessarily have to be overseas or whatever, but it's going to be where you're going to spend a lot of time in the next few years. What do you do once you're there? How do you set expectations, all that stuff? And then the fourth thing they talked about was timing for the second wave, or I guess the third wave now. Like, people are already talking about the third wave, which I didn't even know the second wave was over. And that was a topic of discussion too.
Oh, get with the times, Dave.
I know. It's just hard to keep up. It's hard to keep up. Especially when you don't know anybody who's actually gotten sick. Yeah. The first pandemic where nobody actually knows anybody who got sick.
As long as they're properly socially distancing.
That's working so well.
Yeah, nobody knows anyone anymore. And we found
no one knows anyone anymore.
We found that the remote conference was actually pretty fun because the chat stream was going on, and I think they could do a little more. What was the most popular question, Dave?
Oh, where can I buy Monero?
Yes.
Where can I buy Monero?
Over and over and over.
The answer is Binance. Binance is a great place to buy Monero, but you cannot buy it on Coinbase. If you want to buy Monero, most of you will need to use Coinbase to convert your US dollars or whatever into something like Ethereum. Don't turn it into Bitcoin if you want to buy Monero, because Bitcoin takes forever for transactions to clear. It takes like 6 hours or something. It's brutal. Anyway, so you buy Ethereum, you transfer Ethereum to your Binance trading account, and then you can buy Monero on Binance. Anyway, there you go. That's how you buy Monero.
Yeah. So there was a bit of a community aspect going on that you typically get at conferences. Obviously not the same. And it would have been nice if there was like Skype chat rooms or something you could drop in on, and there was no like meet and greet afterwards or anything like that. But it was still pretty fun, and we had pizza and stuff going on. So it was a fun way to do a conference. So.
It was, yeah. It went off pretty well. The live chat was actually pretty great. Because it showed kind of the flavor of the community, especially when one of the guests was talking about sort of when you get to your destination type stuff. He was talking about sustainable gardening and making your own fertilizer and stuff, which involved a lot of poop jokes. And the live chat was really, really good for that, including Jeff. Jeff got hit on it too.
And all the vegans came out of the woodwork. It was pretty great.
Yeah, been vegan 4 years. I've been vegan 8.
7.2 years, yeah.
And then Jeff popped them all. He's like, I sometimes don't eat meat for like 4 or 5 days. Yeah.
Oh, he called himself a vegetarian.
Yeah. Sometimes.
So sometimes.
So the first thing that they talked about in the conference was locations to go to, and it was pretty great because they were pretty realistic about it. The general theme was that everything sort of every place sort of sucks right now, and so one of the popular places was Panama. Panama came up over and over and over again, and one of the reasons for that is Panama does a residency program where if you open a bank account and put $5,000 in the bank account, you can apply for residency. And to maintain that residency, all you need to do is visit the country for 1 day every 2 years. Most countries for residency require more than half the year on site. Panama's 1 day every 2 years. Yeah, right. And Canada, once you get residency, to maintain it, you have to spend 2 years every 5 years there. So 40% time. Anyway, Panama's 1 day.
And one of the things that also came up was that it's a bit of a, you don't have to live in the country that you have citizenship in. So it's like once you get out, you get at least 1, maybe 2 residencies going on, depending on how the requirements of the different countries. And like Dave was saying, that Panama was it was kind of like the first step. That's like your on-ramp, is you get the Panama citizenship and then, residency. And then from there, also Panama is a shipping and airline hub. So there's a lot of flights in and out, and it's easy to get to either by boat or by airplane. So it's kind of the portal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you keep going. So one of the things Jeff actually mentioned was that he's kind of been in Mexico for like 8 or 9 years, maybe more like 12 at this point. I don't know, something like that. He doesn't have residency there. He's traveled enough for work. He goes around talking at conferences and whatever, that what he actually did was he got a Dominican citizenship. There was this is funny. There was a fast track program in the Dominican Republic where you could pay, I don't know, $25,000, and it was 2 years. And I remember that was a big deal back in 2008. And I almost pursued that program. And Jeff did. And what happened was the U.S. Gov put pressure on the Dominican government to extend that program because so many Americans applied for it. And they were not happy about that. So they extended it to 3 years, and then they extended it to 4 years, and then they extended it to 5 years, and then they extended it to 6 years, and then they extended it to 7 years, and then they extended it to 8 years, and then they stopped extending it. And Jeff had got in right before their political cycle where they extended a year. So he ended up waiting 8 years for his 2-year economic citizenship, but he got it, and so he's a paper resident, I guess, / citizen of the Dominican Republic. So that gets him out of Canada for tax reasons. And then he's a visitor to Mexico, and he just renews his visitor visa. And one of the things he said was if you overstay your visitor visa, when you're leaving, sometimes they'll bark at you or whatever. And he said $50 usually takes care of that. So you stay for 9 months instead of 3 or whatever it is, and you just slip the guy $50 on the way out, and you're good to go. So there's some practical realities to that. But anyway, so Panama came up a bunch. There were good reasons for Panama. One of the speakers who's setting up a program to help people get to Panama, he actually lived in, I think it was Belize, for 14 years. So he knew what it was like living somewhere else, and he talked about little things making a big difference. That was one of his themes, and he had some funny stories about getting the language wrong, and then he had some less funny stories about getting your property title wrong. which is what happened to Jeff when Jeff tried to do this thing. And Jeff tried to do a property development in Chile a few years ago, and he never actually owned or remotely came close to owning the property, I think is what happened. And so as he got close to doing the development, he found out that he didn't actually have the title. And then everybody's money sort of went, disappeared. So this guy talked about that. And he said that's something to consider when moving to one of these places. So one of the upsides of Belize is the official language is English. And so all contracts are written in English. So at least you can read the contract. But he said basically be careful when you're moving and make sure you only have to move once. If you screw it up thoroughly enough, you'll need to move twice. And most people won't have the money to try to do it a second time. Like they'll just be sunk. So so that was a theme that he harped on, and that's kind of his business is helping people do that. So yeah, Panama, Belize, Mexico was a destination, Ecuador was one, and Portugal was one too. If you want to move to Europe and be around while the euro is falling apart, the eurozone, in a place that will be pretty much unaffected, Portugal was put pretty high up there, which I've heard before. I've read some expat books about people who just moved to Europe and just lived there without proper paperwork, and Portugal is a popular destination for that because nobody really cares that you're overstaying your welcome there. Yeah. So, what else on the moving front? Well, there were some specific things. This guy in Panama has a development. If you're curious about the TDV summit, I think you go to $vigilante.com/summit. I do believe. Let me put the link up. You can pay for the videos. Let's see. You can pay for the videos after the fact. You can also buy notes for the conference. So, yeah, where would it be? I don't know. We'll find it and post a link.
One of the questions I was thinking about after the conference was, what are this might interest Mike, is what are the regulations for general aviation like in South and Central America? Are they dictated by the FAA? Or not dictated, but do they follow the FAA regulations, or are they a little more loose in terms of aircraft certification and stuff like that? I thought that would be a fun thing to explore, because I think that might be a safer way to travel in the future. If you had your own plane, you could avoid roads and skip some border crossings and COVID tests and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, each country will have its own aviation authority, but they follow along with the FAA. Kind of leads all of it, so they use the FAA as a model. And I like with medicals. Actually, medicals all over the world go through the FAA in Oklahoma City. So a foreign civil aviation authority will just run the medical program through the FAA. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how things pan out after the U.S. government can no longer fund itself. Are they still going to be able to do that, or they have to set up their own systems at that point? If roads are going to be an issue, then runways may be an issue too, unless you have the ability to land gravel bars and So,
I guess one of the themes of the conference was redundant paths to a place to live, redundant paths to travel. Don't stop when you have just one place of residency, because things can change.
Right.
Yeah, it was a little bit. That's very true, and that theme was kind of like the in business, like the easiest customer to get is the one you already have, but you you want to be adding to the mix whenever possible, without compromising where you already are. I mean, that's one of the ways that you build a larger base of customers, and they were treating residency largely the same way. They were treating it like they were treating the place you live sort of like the car you happen to drive, or the investments that you happen to have. And just because you drive, whatever, say you drive a really little super efficient car, and then a couple years from now you buy a farm, it's probably time to get a different car, so that you can
Big
haul your
old
animals
truck.
around and stuff. Yeah, exactly. And so, and same with investments. Let's say you, I don't know, you owned whatever, you owned oil for a while, and then things changed in the world. You don't necessarily hang on to your investments for life either. You hang on to them until they're not useful anymore, and then you do something different. And so um, they were treating where you live in sort of the same way, which is not uh, culturally compatible with the way that we are raised as Americans. We're programmed. We've been programmed to treat the place we live differently, um, than that, and that's part of the reason that, I don't know, Americans are clingy with that. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
they were sort of roll with the punches style. One of the things they did bring up, which was kind of interesting, was most of these other places, in Panama in particular, have actually had pretty weird lockdown rules that are continuing right now. And so they're like, well, every place kind of sucks right now. No place is perfect. And they brought up that, like, if you're already set up in a rural area in the States or something like that, where you're not really affected by stuff, mm, that might be fine. Like, you might already be in a pretty good spot. Um,
Yeah, and another thing they brought up was that these things take time to unwind, and it looks scary right now, but it's just the beginning. There's like a first shock, and then things will go a little bit back to normal, and then it'll be like a step function. So it's not a complete emergency get out while you still can, but don't wait either. So there's things you can start on now, and yeah, it kind of what I heard, something that was almost exactly what we were saying a couple of shows ago, which was mentally be ready and be mobile, be ready to move.
yeah, I have options. So that gets into, instead of just locations. Yeah, it was sort of interesting. They said if you got your rural bug out in the States, that's probably fine. I mean, bug out, like your rural home, like where you live and where you have a life outside of a city. That's probably fine. They're only, I don't know, the consensus opinion of that was just that politically, virtually no place has more to lose than the United States. As the United States breaks up into more representative regions of wildly different, social opinion, that'll be good in the long run. But virtually no place has more to lose than the United States from doing that. So that will likely be painful. And how much will you be insulated from that in a rural area? Hard to say. So then they got into things to do now, like before leaving, or if you're not leaving, just getting ready for whatever is coming. And so a lot of that was like mental prep, just being resilient. And they had a few different speakers talk about that. They had one guy just talk about, having adjusting your perspective. so that you can see your opportunities instead of your obstacles, basically. And then they had another speaker talking about how to do small scale farming in whatever area you happen to be, whether it's your yard or, if you live in a city and you just have a little plot or just planters or something like that. And one of the things I think he mentioned was just doing something is better than waiting to do something, like even on a really small scale, because then at least you're an active participant in your future. So that was
And they had a couple people that they had talked to they were business owners who in the last few weeks had lost their brick and mortar businesses, either in the U.S. or Europe, and they were kind of like, well, we're not ready to quit that dream, and so he was talking about getting your business online, and he said it's a tough shift for a lot of people who have been in physical goods and having a storefront in a city and stuff like that. But he said he talked about his history of starting a newsletter. What was it? He was in Vancouver, right? He was in Canada, and he started an online newsletter. Yeah, Jeff. Jeff talked about at the very end of day 2, they all did kind of how each speaker went through how we got here, and his was about when he was young, he got into computers and he was like, how can I make money with this? So.
Yeah, and then he wrote a newsletter, and then he wanted to have stock quotes on the website, and so he went to the Vancouver Exchange. He just went to the folks that administer it and said, hey, I want to put your stock quotes on my website. And they're like, what's a website? And so they didn't really care. So then he found a kid who wrote some software to do that. And so his website was the first one where you could actually watch Vancouver Exchange quotes online live. So yeah, that was something they talked about, taking your business or your skills online, and harder to do for some types of work than other types of work.
Yeah.
Most of the folks at the conference now do something like some form of online trading or something crypto related, or like media production, like photography and video editing and photo editing and stuff like that, or online
Watching
marketing.
teak trees grow.
There were some teak trees. That's true. That was the only physical. Well, there were some metal storage guys, right?
Yep.
So there were some people in the physical space, but there weren't a lot of people in attendance or certainly speaking who had work that involved moving physical objects or making physical objects. And that was interesting. Those are difficult to take on the road for obvious reasons. You have to take stuff with you. But I think there's an opportunity for that too, because there's this community of people who are preparing to go wherever that may be. And it may even be somewhere local. They might be preparing to go somewhere local, just a bunch of city people looking to move out. But they don't. Most of them have some money from trading and crypto and stuff like that. And they have a pretty good idea of what lifestyle they would like, how much authoritarianism they would like to live under. But most of them don't know how to build their own house, or how to put in a road, or how to do drainage, or how to, if they can't get hot water, like what to do about that, or if there's unreliable electricity, what do you do about that? And so that's something that we talked about, Corey and I talked about, was there's an opportunity in the broader community of these folks who are interested in leaving, of being useful and knowing how to do things. So it could be, a little bit like the the folks who came over on the Mayflower almost died because they didn't know how to farm, right? So like, we're gonna go have a commune, and they went and had a commune, and they basically almost died, and I think a bunch of them did, and then they got some assistance on how to farm. So I think there's some and I think there's a place for people who know how to just kind of do stuff. And I thought of a lot of people, us on the show here, and then a lot of listeners who aren't, we don't spend all day staring at a screen trading cryptocurrency, but we've all dealt with an oil stove that doesn't work in the winter, or frozen water pipes, or these sort of things, and I think those types of skills are going to be really useful to there's going to be little pockets of people who are escaping the global authoritarianism, and they're going to need people who know how to do stuff.
Yep. There was oh shoot, I forgot already. Go ahead again. I'll think of it.
Sure. Yep. So then that goes along with theme number 3 of the conference. So theme number 1, just for refresh, was locations to go to. Theme 2 was like things to do now. How do you get ready to go? Mental prep, stuff like that. Investing was a big one of those. They talked about making some investments. Making some good investments now gives you options later. If you can make some good investments now, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to buy the things you wish you could or whatever. And it's actually likely that a lot of those different types of investments will get confiscated. But to the extent that you can preserve some form of mobile wealth that you can take with you wherever you may go, even if it's just in the countryside in the United States or something, that's going to give you more options than if you didn't have any funds. So that was kind of the theme of the investment folks. So that's number 2, things to do now. And then number 3 was things to do once you're in your location. And part of that was setting expectations. So like all of the folks who had kind of reached their destination, a lot of the folks running the conference and speaking at the conference were not in the States. In fact, most of them weren't. There were, Jeff was in, I don't know where Jeff was. I think he was in Mexico at his home. A couple people were in Panama. A guy called in from India. A couple of folks were in the States. So people were kind of all over.
Yeah, the India guy. India sounds pretty crazy right now. Not a lot of fun.
Yeah, he said don't go there. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get hit with a stick at the very. That's the least. If you go out when you're not supposed to, the cops all have sticks. And they'll
if you walk out of your house. Yeah.
Well, India is a model country for the Gates agenda. Anyway, Gates is good friends with one of the guys. I can't remember his name. He runs a company that does the tracking ID over there, and that's Adhar. That's the company.
Okay.
India's the country where they canceled the currencies.
Yep.
And forced people to go digital.
They talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. India and China are each their own little experiment ground. Gates was doing all his vaccine stuff over there until too many people died, and he was kicked out of the country too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that's a blast.
Yeah. So there was some stuff on. Do you join one of these like development things? And the advantage of that is that if you're new to that country and you're new to travel, you have a community you show up and you have a community of people who have kind of done the same thing. You're all on a similar path, and the opportunities for networking and business and finding out what people's problems are and then solving them is higher in that environment than if you just move out to the countryside somewhere. But if you do, like, that's another way that you can go. It's just a little bit more of a stretch for most people to pull up and move out to the middle of nowhere in a foreign country. So.
Yeah, and they talked about some of the problems of that, like with the setting expectations. Yeah, one of the ways they talked about that was depending on where you move, you're going to be moving basically back in time. So if you move to like Panama, that's basically the current era, or maybe 5 years back or something. But if you move to like a remote region in Nicaragua or something, prepare for the challenges of like the 1940s or 30s technologically. So your communication is going to be like a landline phone, probably, maybe. Your electricity will be on some of the time. Access to stuff like building materials will be, just set your expectations. It'll be different depending on where you go.
Mhm.
And one of the things they talked about there too was making sure when you go, you know what you're signing up for as far as contracts and laws. Like you go someplace to buy some land, are you even legally allowed to buy land? Do what's your residency status? Can you even buy this? Have you learned enough of the language, or do you know enough people there to help you navigate that? Just kind of real practical stuff. And then as far as things to do, yeah, like Corey was saying, the communities of expats or even of locals, maybe especially of locals, are going to have more opportunities. But it means you're going to be dealing with just life. Like you'll be dealing with life there just like you deal with life here. But if you move off in the middle of nowhere, well, that has its own challenges. So that was a good discussion. You really have to watch the conference videos to kind of get all of that. But basically, it was just staying grounded. Nobody there was saying, well, if you go to this place, everything will be easy, and if you go to this other place, it'll be even easier. It was like it's going to be work wherever you go, and there's going to be trade-offs. The guy who'd gone to Belize for 14 years, he said there were trade-offs in going there, but one of the amazing things was that they didn't encounter anybody who scolded him for not having his kids in school. Like they raised their kids there, and that was one of the huge wins for him.
We've talked about it too. There's also no recipe. There's no one way or best way to do this, and even if there was, it would, the amount of people that went through that would kind of shut it down. So it's everyone has to find their own path with this.
Yep. And that was some of the communities they're trying to put together. They're attempting to help people out without overpromising, which was pretty cool. Like it was a fairly well-grounded conference. I've been to some of these where it's like, we have this perfect place set up and you're going to move there and everything's going to be easy and it's all going to be set up for you. And they start at $10,000. And then you look into it and they start at like $450,000. And there's no house. Like you get a plot of land and like all this other stuff. So it was pretty straightforward. So one of the shortcut methods to getting residency that they offered was there's one of the property developer guys. He bought a bunch of teak forest in Panama, and teak is like, it's this super durable hardwood, and it grows really slow. The harvest is every 25 years, and there's basically a global shortage of it. So from what it looked like to me, he bought a bunch of teak forest and is planning to harvest it and make some cash on it. He has subdivided it into little plots, and he's selling investment plots in his teak forest for about 20 grand, 21 grand. And if you buy a plot, then he helps you get all your Panamanian residency stuff taken care of. And then it's yours to harvest in another 11 years, if so you choose. And it's supposed to have, what did he say? It's supposed to have $75,000 worth of harvestable
teak.
teak on it. So in the live comments, people are like, "Can I build a tree house and live in the tree house in my teak forest?" Um, but that was one option, and that was like the push a button, don't have to move there option for Panama. And this guy's lived in Panama for 5 or 6 years now, and Belize for 14 years before that. So he basically knows what he's doing. Fairly trustworthy guy. A couple of the other options were um, Jeff Berwick is working on a couple more developments that hopefully go better than the Chilean experiment. And I think two of them are in Mexico, and then one of them is in Panama. And they are making sure they get all the ownership paperwork right, so they actually have all the right titles and everything. And then they're gonna have this area of, I don't know, a few hundred acres, something like that, and then subdivide it and build tiny homes on it and have a large gardening area and things like that. And there should be roads in there, and there should be power and plumbing and things like that. I don't know how developed it is, but that's the direction that they want to go. And so the idea there, I forget what he said those would start at, but they were pretty reasonable. But the idea there would be it would be sort of turnkey, and most of the weird paperwork stuff would be taken care of. However, one of the things that this property investor guy noted was when you buy stuff overseas, if you haven't been there already, um, you should be pretty wary about whatever you're buying. And he had, just as like a simple illustration, he had some pictures of these houses. There was this really nice house that was like 350,000 US or whatever. I think it was in Panama, overlooking the ocean. It was a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, and he showed the picture of the kit of the bathrooms and stuff and the fixtures and everything. And underneath, then he showed a picture underneath the sink. And instead of there being a hot water, cold water connect under the sink, there was one cold water connection with a Y on it. And one of the cold water outlets went to the hot water spigot, and the other one went to the cold water spigot. So it didn't matter which spigot you turned on, you got cold water. And for a Westerner to move into a house that both taps only have cold water, and it was built that way, is a very foreign concept. But to somebody from Panama or Belize or Costa Rica or whatever, it's like, you got running water. Like, you should be happy with that. So
yeah, another thing to keep in mind too is that places like that, the cold water itself is warm enough to take a shower. When I was in the Philippines, it was the same way. Took a cold shower. Well, it was like a warm shower here.
yeah,
So
right. So there's differences, right? So there's adjusting expectations. But regardless of one of the interesting opportunities I think that exist in some of these developments is they are going to be made largely by locals, and I think they'll be fine. But when I went to Jordan, the guy who I was working with there, he's a big muckety muck in the area, and he owns the Hotel Millennium there. I think it's really ritzy, 25-story hotel with a big club on the top and swimming pools and all this stuff. Really, really, really expensive rooms with all stone tile or whatever, assembled by Filipino and Indonesian labor, imported. And so it's one of these like the big stone shower that was in my room. It looked gorgeous, except the floor of the shower leaned towards the floor of the bathroom, not towards the drain. And so if you didn't roll up a towel, all of the shower water would run out on the floor. And that's how this place was built. And so they knew they needed to use expensive materials, but they didn't have, someone with Northern European attention to detail, I guess you could say. And so they got hotel rooms that look gorgeous that don't work right. And, it's no skin off my nose whether the floor floods, so it didn't bother me. But a lot of these developments that happen there, I think they're going to have little issues like that. Not showstoppers, and culturally acceptable where they've been made. But I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people who know how to make stuff right, even if you don't know how to trade crypto or whatever. especially if any of these things take off. If there's a few hundred Westerners who have a few bucks who have moved to one of these places, they're going to want their stuff to work. And their definition of working is going to be different. So,
yeah. And one other thing was in that same line is anarchists like to harp on what the U.S. government does or doesn't do, but there's a lot of stuff that works really well here, and don't take that for granted. Because when you go there, you will find all the stuff that was kind of just done in the background to make everything work. And Peterson talks about that too, when he talks about the it's a miracle that we're all able to sit in this room. This, he's giving a lecture in Canada in the middle of winter. He says it's a miracle that we're all able to sit here, not starving, in a warm building and have these discussions and lectures and stuff. And that's kind of when you go back in time, so to speak, you get to see what life is like without that. But you also get to reform it. And that's a fun process.
Yeah. Last thing they talked about at the conference, like the fourth major theme, was the timing for the next wave. And everybody, I don't know, I think everybody was pretty honest about not knowing exactly when it would be. So there were people who talked about, how long it took to get here, like the inevitable is sort of finally upon us. And then there were both ideas. There was the idea that this stuff all happened really, really fast, and it shows how quickly things can happen. But also that it could be a while, before the next event. You don't know the exact timing. Like, when is crypto going to go to $1 billion? When's Bitcoin going to be worth $100,000 a Bitcoin? And they're like, who knows? Could be next year, could be 5 years, could be 10 years. But the precedent is set and the trend is set, and a lot of these things are things that you probably wish you were working on anyway, and this has just sort of moved them up the priority list. And so that was the general course of action for that. Like, what's the timing for the next wave? Was to get your ducks in a row. Act like it's coming sooner than you wish. And then if it doesn't, you'll be ready. You'll be all set. And if it does, you'll be all set too.
Dave, who was it? I think it was one of the speakers. Or maybe it was all of them. Spoke a little bit about price inflation too, going around this time. As far as preparedness, what you're talking about. Part of the wave,
yeah.
I think.
So the guys who were talking about trading, they had this guy, the Market Sniper, I think is his name. He has a YouTube channel. And people were asking him about like oil price targets, right? They said, so his big call, the reason he got invited to speak at the conference was at Anarchapulco, they had like this place your fantasy trade, and whoever wins the fantasy trading game, gets some prize or whatever. And this was in February, and he put in a massive short on oil. And so he just killed. He totally won the competition. That's how Jeff sort of got to know him. So people were asking him, what's going to happen with oil? And he said, well, he expected it to go up a little bit more as things recover, but then to pull back as the Green New Deal sort of, as people fantasize about a world where no one uses it anymore. And then in the long term, people look around and realize that most of the stuff they use still runs on gas, and that's still cheaper than using batteries for a lot of applications. And so he said long-term price target was like, $70 to $90 a barrel, maybe higher. And he said, don't forget, inflation will be part of that. Like, you got to price inflation into everything. And when he was looking at he was looking at investments. Like, he makes a lot of money by taking short positions on stuff. He looks for stuff that's overbought, that doesn't have any fundamentals anymore, and he does what he calls a conspiratorial analysis of a lot of things, which is great. And
Which
so,
kind
like,
of means pull your head out of the charts and look around at what's actually happening in the world, and follow the major trends, even if they don't seem like likely things that would be being talked about on Bloomberg markets and stuff like that.
yeah, it was like a fusion of Gerald Salente's Trends Journal with highly technical trading analysis. But yeah, one of the themes he talked about, like you were saying, Josh, was this price inflation. He said, don't forget about price inflation. And when he would bring up charts to show the performance of a given trade or a given position, he would usually price that position in terms of the Dow. He wasn't really pricing his trades in terms of dollars, because he was saying, like, as a baseline, as an investor, as a baseline, you're going to have your money in some index fund. Like, an investor is at least that smart. They're at least going to hedge um, that way. And so he was pricing his trades and his positions in terms of a market fund, which is sort of intrinsically inflation adjusted. But he said, don't forget about that. Don't forget about inflationary pressures. Then one of the charts he brought up was Bitcoin versus the Dow. Because he talked about Bitcoin, people go, "Wow, you could make a lot of money in the Dow too." And so he showed them relative to each other. He priced Bitcoin versus the Dow, and it gained a huge amount of value versus the Dow. And he said, why is this? He says, because Bitcoin outran inflation. It actually added value. Did the Dow outrun inflation? Who knows? So that was an interesting way to price everything. Wenzel, you've sent us some Wenzel links about that, Josh. And I mean, in his talks, in Robert Wenzel's talks, he says he suggests going into certain asset classes, but then he says, don't forget, inflation's going to make everything go up. But that doesn't mean he's excited. He's not interested in just buying something that's going to cover inflation. Who else talked about that? They had Colin Cattell talking about gold mining stocks and gold. Mm-hmm. And I actually missed part of his talk. There's supposed to be a thing where you can go and watch the previous, if you were if you paid for it, you're supposed to go watch it. They don't have it up yet for replay. But he was talking about gold stocks and basically them going absolutely ballistic, because with inflation, you're gonna have more dollars sloshing around, and it's already true. There's a lot of dollars sloshing around, and they're all looking for yield. They're looking for something that's going to provide some return on investment. And I mean, this was the same situation in 2008, except it was a tenth the amount of money sloshing around, and
in about a tenth of the time.
Right. Yes. So there's a lot more money sloshing around, and it's hunting for yield. And interest rates, like, we thought they were low in 2008. They're zero now. They're nothing. So you can't buy bonds. You can't put it in a bank. So he said this stuff's going to be sloshing around looking for yield, and there's no yield to be had, even in traditional markets. That's part of the reason some of the tech stocks are getting run way up, is everybody's just trying, like, they have a big pile of money. It's like, where the heck do I put this? And so he said gold is the only asset that's recovered to its pre-lockdown highs. It's actually beating its pre-lockdown highs already, which means that gold mining is the only sector that's going to have crazy yield, because the profitability of gold mining is better now than it was before the pandemic, which is not true of any other sector. So he said it hasn't happened yet, but it's inevitable that it will happen, even though people hate gold and think it's stupid and whatever. Their dollars are going to like it, and so they're gonna end up there. Corey sent a note. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Corey sent a note. It was Mr. Meat Tornado. Sent me some bucks to pay for the conference and watch it. So thank you for that. And we're trying to get everything we can out of that and share it. Well, we've been talking to him about some stuff on the conference, and we got a phone call with him at some point to give him the lowdown. But we're sharing it more broadly with the listener base here as well.
There's a nonlinear return on the gold mining stocks because and I think you guys talked about this a couple episodes ago. When the gold price hits a certain threshold, and it's different for every mine, and it has to do with the relative price of oil as well. A lot of those mines go online; they become profitable. So a small increase in gold price can bring the mining stocks up a bunch.
Which is already starting to happen, even with some junior mines in Alaska. Even some mines that are not in production in Alaska yet. In fact, there's a couple of interests to me that have tripled or quadrupled in the last 2 months. So it's already happening in the sector, and that's something he was talking about. And he said gold mining generally sucks as an industry. It's a generally crappy industry to be part of. Because the risk and the capital investment is huge, but there are these little windows of time. Where you're sitting on, you already have your claim staked or whatever, and you're sitting on it, and the asset price goes way up, and so everything you have in the ground it becomes a bank, and you just pull money out of the ground. And that hasn't. He said the gold's been in a bear market for 7 or 8 years. It broke out 3 years ago. It started its slow ascent from like 1,300, just slowly on up to 17 now. And now it's getting ready to break out. But that fits the increase in the price of gold. Robert Wenzel talked about inflation. Inflation doesn't happen uniformly. It happens in the things that people want. That's where the money ends up. And Catel's take on gold and the gold mining sector is that people are going to want gold because it's going to be the only inflation hedge, and they're going to want gold mining stocks because it's going to be the only asset that yields a good return. And so money's just going to pour in, and as more money pours in, it'll drive even more money coming in. It'll be this runaway thing. And interestingly, the consensus of the speakers was that that's true even more of gold and gold mining than of crypto. There was some talk about crypto and it maturing and it being a great way to move assets if you're moving from one jurisdiction to another, like sell all your stuff, pay all the taxes on it and everything, so the money's free and clear, and then put the money in a crypto exchange, move to your new location, and then pull it out. Then you're not crossing a border with anything weird. You're not wiring money through the banking system. Super easy. So they were saying there's big value for crypto, but not necessarily investment value.
Question in the comments just came up. Where can I buy Monero?
Oh, yeah. Where can you buy Monero? Yeah, everybody was posting that. It was hilarious. What was the other one? Oh, where's Lucy? That was the other big question.
Yeah.
Jeff's dog. Yeah,
Lucy,
and the answer was
she
sleeping.
was eating tacos.
Tacos and kisses.
That's right.
This is kind of the first time in our lifetime where we've seen this possibility with gold, I think, isn't it? Since we've been aware of such things, at least the most realistic possibility. We've always discussed it, and the 2008 situation was somewhat similar, but like you said, David, 1/10, and they haven't even started. They haven't even started spending. We haven't even talked about the House passing the $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. That's a good portion of its Green New Deal stuff, like you were saying. But they don't have $1.5 trillion, and the House said dead on arrival, but or the Senate said dead on arrival, but Trump's bill is $2 trillion. Doesn't have the green stuff, but I mean the Green New Deal stuff, but they don't have $2 trillion to print. I mean, they'll have to print it. It just adds more. So when you talk about this just being a tenth of what it was, 2008 being a tenth of what it is now, and we're just in the beginning. The PPP was extended. That's another, I don't know how many billions and billions. So, yeah, the inflationary effect could actually be what we feared it could be for the first time, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually in the end game now.
Mm-hmm.
They talked about silver a little bit too, and price targets for gold for the year. People were talking about 2,000 an ounce, and then maybe over the next 5 years they're talking maybe 5,000. Price targets for silver they were talking about 50 to 100 an ounce being a realistic price target.
The market sniper was talking about gold and silver, and the way that he said during times of inflation, he draws the line flat for gold. That's the standard. Fiat goes down, and silver shoots past gold while the inflation is increasing. So there's like some period where he thinks that silver outperforms gold. So there was also
because the factor between the two is so large right now. I mean, it's awkwardly silver's awkwardly lower than gold normally is. Like the ratio should be a lot closer than it's still in the hundreds, I believe. So
yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, and silver mining is way down, and during the recovery, a lot of it's going to get used up.
They talked about using it in terms of wealth storage, and it's kind of like trying to pack beer on your camping trip versus whiskey. It's hard to move around, so it's not very useful for being transportable. It's just not dense enough. So.
Yeah, each have their place. But and then the challenge with gold, they had a lot of the there's some new counterfeit gold bar stories out there now.
Signed in February.
Yep. So that's
did
happening.
Did any of you guys read about those? Can you tell us what the story was
in greater detail?
Yeah. Okay.
No, I just saw that they had some bank bars or whatever that never got audited.
Right. It was a bunch of them. It was like in billions. So.
Copper bars plated in gold.
Which isn't even the right way to do it.
Yeah. It's the cheapest way, the easiest to get caught, and it worked for a while. So.
Yeah, they advised against buying gold on eBay for the time being. Apparently tungsten coins. There's a lot of tungsten coins out there from China.
We should try out that app. There's one of the questions was how to detect counterfeits. And they said that there is an app that they've had some good success with that I thought it was going to be some dumb thing like you put the coin on the screen and obviously it doesn't work. But you hit the coin and you listen to the vibration of it. And the tungsten coins are going to sound different than the gold coins. And supposedly this app is supposed to tell you that.
That's
which would be a fun thing to try, but I don't have any tungsten coins.
You can try it with a silver, just gold and silver.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there were, each thing had its place, and they talked a lot about recent gold confiscations as well, and ones that happened to folks who were even doing it right. Like there was one guy who was flying. He decided to fly straight from whatever Germany to Panama, to physically deposit his gold at the storage facility there. And there was a storm, and the plane got diverted to a Banana Republic, and they unloaded the plane and took it. They found a suitcase of gold or whatever, and they're like, "Sweet, looks like we got. Thanks for bringing this. Bye
That's
bye." So that was a place where crypto fits in.
yeah, that's the real issue with gold, is that it's not it's portable. It's sort of portable, but if they catch you with it, they're going to take it. If you try to go through the airport, you're not going to get it through. And getting through customs is going to be another issue. And then if you try to deposit somewhere, like you say, they're just going to take it. Say thanks. So
Yep, they might.
there's drawbacks to all that. With crypto, if you're carrying around on a jump drive, you could lose it all. If you're running from the cops and you're in polyester pants and you get a spark, oh, there goes your riches.
Note to self: no polyester pants.
Or any sort of or wool.
They were talking
whatever.
They were very seriously talking about Faraday bags and stuff like that too.
Mm-hmm.
These are these RF shielded bags to put your stuff in.
Uh-huh.
Very seriously talking about, like, for crypto wallets. I have one of those little USB Ledger Nano S's. Yeah, which is it's okay. But they were talking about fully metal ones, where you can't. If there's a metal case around it, it's harder to zap the chip inside remotely and erase it.
Right.
They were pretty seriously talking about a lot of that, which I thought was interesting. They were talking
the other
about
one was memorizing your the seed words, which should
Right.
I don't know if I'm good enough to do that, but there's I remember in reading about in Greece, they would remember stories, or they would remember the highlights of whatever presentation by pulling out keywords and then telling a story with them. So there's little stuff like that where you could take your seed words and make a funny story, and then you just have to remember the story. And
correct horse battery staple.
Exactly.
Yeah, the seed. So the seed. If you have your seed words, you can regenerate your private keys for your wallet. But anyway, where can I buy Monero? Yeah, so it was great because everybody was really honest about all the drawbacks, the upsides and drawbacks of everything. And I think one of the things Jeff mentioned was that he expected, and maybe it was just in one of his videos that I watched recently, he said he didn't expect to make it through the next decade without a large portion of what he has being confiscated. He expects, something or a few things to be confiscated. And so he's decided to preemptively be at peace with that. And it could be, crypto, although that's actually really hard. If you do it right, it's really hard for your crypto to get taken. Could be a bank account somewhere, could be gold or silver that's stored somewhere, but that's probably just in the cards for the next decade. So not having all your eggs in one basket. If things get really weird and you have the right eggs, they're going to be worth a lot anyway. So you don't have to worry about having them all be rock star performers and all in the same place. So it was weird. We've all heard these conversations before for decades and decades, since the 90s, and for me anyway, the late 90s, and for a lot of people since the 70s. But it appears to be game on for this stuff now. It appears to actually be game on, which is bizarre.
Did this conference you watched seem a little bit more down to earth, realistic, goal orientated than Acapulco was?
For sure.
Because that was kind of the beginning of the pandemic, supposed pandemic, while you guys were there, and everything was still kind of this thing.
Crypto
was
was
when things were unsure. Yeah. Yeah, that's when things were starting, and it was, it was still all theory at that point, but
Hmm.
at this point, it's all reality, and it's like I haven't been able to see the whole conference yet, but it's like Gus, Corey, you call him cussing with Gus. Uh, he owned one of the companies for crypto trading, and he was pointing out that in the past he's always tried to stay away from the doom porn, and now he's just outright saying, yeah, that's what's going to happen. And so I think we're just coming to the reality that the worst fears that we had that we didn't want to talk about before are starting to come true, and it's just something we deal with. Um, Another thing, uh, one thing I'm noticing though uh, about where to go, they it's the same places I've heard about for years. It's Panama, Belize, uh, uh, Costa Rica, Mexico. Um, but are we limited to those options? And I was looking at uh, some of the stuff going on around. So Russia has blacklisted Bill Gates, put him on the same blacklist with Jacob Rothschild and George Soros, and also demanded that Microsoft software be taken off of their computers. So, and Newsweek is bashing them for spreading the Bill Gates conspiracy theory, as they call it. And so, is Russia one that's not going to put up with the so-called New World Order that's being pushed around that the U.S. is front and center with?
Yeah,
And
possibly, or they're working on their own competing version or something. But yeah,
mhm.
probably not the same.
Right, yeah. Russia wants to be controlled by its own oligarchs, not some uh, uh, you know collection of oligarchs out of Europe with their
Support
own.
local
Right.
oligarchs.
Well,
That's
they've
right.
kind of gotten the short end of the
Uh huh.
stick.
Hmm.
They've gotten the short end of the stick over the last several hundred years.
Yeah. And and Russia is definitely not a free place to be, especially if you want to do cryptos. Um, but the east far east of Russia, there's not really much enforcement out there. I mean, if you go to Moscow, sure. Um, but and we're pretty close to here up here. We're pretty close to Far East Russia.
Can see it from my house.
That's right. We got
Basically,
the
swim there.
I have to
we
get on
got
my
the little
deck.
Diomede. We're only 2 miles from it.
Right. Yeah. There are other places certainly. I mean,
Right.
most of the guys at the conference are sort of I mean, they're offering their own
Hmm.
experience. And a lot of them have a financial background or a property development background. So they've been in places that people want to go anyway, and
Hmm.
they've been in places that have established, solid banking systems. And so and I think the guy who spoke at the end of the first day on property, who lived in Belize for a long time, is doing this project in Panama. He sort of talked about that. He said there's a lot of the places that people are going to go are places that people go on vacation anyway, and that's a
Hmm.
safe. If normal people go on vacation there, and you want to make an investment property there, then you're sort of safe. You're sort of hedged, even if things don't get weird, because people like going there anyway. Um, but that way of thinking constrained their window of possibilities for sure.
Hmm.
If you're not worried about selling your
Mhm.
place, whatever.
Right.
And Jeff talked about that too. There's he talked about some of the patriots in America who are already, not necessarily out in the woods, but already have their rural things set up, and they got their farming and they got their little business going. There's people around Fairbanks we know who live outside the borough and have already done some of that stuff, and they're just planning on riding it out
Hmm.
and perhaps actively participating if it comes to that. And he said, It's fine. Like, as long as you know what you're doing, as long as you understand the possibilities that are coming
Right.
and what they mean.
And yeah, and if being in a rural spot in the U.S. is okay as a bug out spot, then pretty much all of Alaska is that, except for Anchorage and about 2 square miles in Fairbanks. Um, I mean, Alaska is rural. Rural Alaska is it's just Alaska, right? So um, we may
There's
not need to do
thousands of
that
people who live illegally on parkland here.
right, right. And how are they going to how's BLM going to enforce that when they no longer have any money? And I don't mean
Not
Black
gonna.
Lives Matter. I
Right.
mean rural land management.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
BLM
them too.
enforcement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't count on it.
BLM enforcement is and Black Lives Matter enforcement is easy to deal with.
Don't be in Seattle.
Sitting over in the corner there.
Yeah. The on the theme of
Well, when
people.
we're
Oh
talking
yeah.
about,
No, jump in.
I was just saying, we're talking about what could come and stuff like that. I'm pretty much settled on the fact. I believe it's going to be a fact that there's going to be lockdown number two.
Uh-huh.
I mean, all the warnings they're letting us know. They let us know before. They let us know back in March. We were talking about this in March, round two, round two. Um, Fauci spoke with the Major League Baseball Association. There's still baseball in America, whatever. But he recommended to them that they get that if they want to have a season this year, because it's way late, they need to do it now. They need to make it short, and they need to get it done before the fall, before the next hit of coronavirus and the next shutdown.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he's the man.
Uh-huh.
Fauci's the man when he says it. So there's warning signs everywhere. He suggested just save your money, count your losses, and wait till next spring.
Uh-huh.
And he said, in fact, about this time next year, we should have a vaccination. You won't have to worry about it. So maybe we'll just have to wait till then. But I mean, the little phrases, the little nuanced words here and there, it's get it done before the second shutdown.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I think the Trump administration is going to fight that tooth and nail because they can't afford another shutdown economically. But
Well, the fact that they're yeah,
it's
the
going to be
fact
a political battle. It's going to be a political battle like we've never seen. Literally
uh-huh.
for the battle of the political power soul of America
Uh-huh.
is going to happen this fall.
Well, just the fact that
It's going to
they
be interesting to see which way it falls.
right. Yeah, just the fact that they have been pushing the at-home ballots, the mail-in ballots, so much. I
Yep.
mean, it's just that's just an indication that that's what they're intending. When the election comes around, it's going to be lockdown time. So look to October, it all falls right in line. So
Yep.
yeah.
Oh well, they're already practicing, Mike. I don't know if you saw
Mm.
that the IRS actually sent out over $3 billion worth of checks. The COVID checks they sent out a couple months ago.
Yeah.
They sent out over $3 billion worth of checks to dead people.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
So they kind of get that. They're practicing the dead people vote by, or they're already paying off the dead people voters
Mm-hmm.
without they even have a
Mm-hmm.
chance to vote. So yeah, that's the entity we want to control everything.
Well, it's yeah. If it's super corrupt, which is going to be, it may be an election that ends up in the Supreme Court again. So then you won't even know the results for who knows how long.
Yeah, or out on the streets.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, remember, I remember when Trump won the first time. I thought it was hilarious
Mm-hmm.
because it was hilarious, and because people cared so much, it was unbelievable. Because like
Mm-hmm.
NPR had been
Yeah.
winding everybody up, like they had these interviews with these immigrant kids in Los Angeles, and the kids thought the feds were going to come and kick their door down and drag them back across the border, and they never, they've been born in America and stuff, because their teachers had been filling their heads with all this crap. So there were people who had a complete emotional meltdown for like weeks. Well, maybe for 4 years, they're still having it over Trump getting elected. And now that they know they can burn down their city when something happens that they don't want, well, how wonderful! Like they can take their tantrum to the streets. So if he gets reelected, I wouldn't be surprised to see that. Like, no, we'd rather burn America down than have Orange Man. Orange Man, bad. But if Sleepy Joe and 5-year lockdown happens, there's the Boogaloo crowd, and they're not super entertained either with what's going on. So
No, they're not.
yeah.
That's funny because no, they're not.
Yeah.
Well, and Sleepy Joe, if Sleepy Joe really went with the agenda, he would stop funding police. Anyway, it could get very interesting in both directions.
Well, they're going to have a hard time. They're going to have a hard time enforcing the mandates with no cops.
Right. Yeah. The whole thing doesn't.
Yeah, they'd have to set up a new agency, like the Nazis did.
Or volunteers.
Right. Which
seems like there's a lot of people who are willing to volunteer.
Like the Nazis did.
Yeah. Which was,
we talk about similarities to the Romans. We talk a lot about similarities on the people's side, like the Bolshevik Revolution and BLM. The three people that started that, they said that they're trained Marxists and this and that. But we haven't talked a whole. So I can see that they kind of align, like, oh yeah, it's like the old Bolshevik Revolution and stuff. Which took 20 years. We were talking about that yesterday, Dave. I was just thinking what Corey said, or Mike, what you said with, they'll just invent a new police system like this. The Nazis did. We haven't really entertained that thought very much because these people aren't going to get rid of their enforcement arm because it's more than just their tax collection enforcement arm. It's their protection too.
Yeah.
The cops protect the politicians.
So
what we'll probably see to replace it is more of a politically active police force.
Yeah, I see it more rather than Nazis. I see it more like the Bolshevik Revolution, where you have the NKVD coming in to compete against and have a war with the White Czars. And that's going to put into people's mind who's legitimate. Is the old police force legitimate, or is the new NKVD or whatever it's going to be, the medical brown shirts, are they legitimate? Which one is it? Which one do we support? And so that would be a foundation for the Civil War.
Which that'd be an interesting question.
Regional.
That'd be an interesting question for the Thin Blue Line folks. Like, one of the things that the Thin Blue Line way of thinking gets you out of is you start with this idea that force is the solution to your problems. Like, you start with that idea, and that guns are the solution to your problems. I'm just going to kill the people who disagree ultimately. And very quickly you get into the uncomfortable position of, well, where do you draw the line on that? And if you're honest about it, it gets very uncomfortable very quickly, because like somebody comes to your house for food who's actually starving, and they break in. Well, like, what are you going to do? You actually have to face that question. Or somebody comes to your house to take your guns. What are you going to do? If you've adopted the position that the solution to your problem is killing people, what are you going to do? So the Thin Blue Line, I think the Thin Blue Line folks they think that they get to sidestep that question by saying, I'm always going to come down on the side of the cops. That's just a way of avoiding the question. But what do you
Mhm.
do? What do you do when the cops aren't the cops anymore, and it's the secret police,
Or
or
they're
it's
not
the
your
BLM
cops.
volunteers? Yeah, the socially recognized authority is not the one that's on your side, or whatever you perceive your side to be. So it'll be quite a conundrum for them.
If you don't
Mhm.
like going to prison, just don't break the law. That works good until the law moves to include you as a lawbreaker for even if your behavior doesn't change.
And even the law may move to include as outlaws the former enforcers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and
Well, won't the new enforcement be to? Go ahead, Mike.
oh, I was just going to say, yeah, there's going to be people who are on neither side, but just um, uh, I ran into a guy once, and this was not anyone I actually knew. This was just someone I ran into, I spoke to. Uh, he told me he had a militia, and the purpose of his militia was that when it all went down, they were going to go raid people's houses and steal their food. And so those aren't people who are on the thin blue line side or who are on the medical brown shirt side or whatever it might be. These are just people who are on the side of, hey, I'm going to take what I want. So those are going to be type of people you might have to deal with as well.
Yeah. The pirates come out.
The pirates, yeah.
Yeah, the conversation at the conference was interesting, um, because of like realizations like that, and even on a more boring note, a lot of people I think had thought like, oh well, when things fall apart, my gold's going to go through the roof and my
Mhm.
crypto's going to go through the roof, and I'll buy a jet and then I'll fly out of here or whatever, and everything had fallen apart like they were waiting for, but crypto hadn't gone anywhere.
Mhm.
And gold had gone up a little bit, but now how do you get it out, and where do you go? Like it all became super real, and
Mhm.
so everybody was grappling with all of the real aspects of the system, beginning to fall apart, and it was a lot less comfortable,
Mhm.
and so the conversations were pretty well grounded. We're talking about the
Yeah.
Dollar Vigilante summit this last week.
Yeah, and if your timing's right, yeah, you could take the money you've made and buy an airplane on the cheap, or a piece of property somewhere. The I don't people remember the 1987 crash. It was especially bad up here, I think. Um, I remember that year, a lot of people were going bankrupt in Alaska. We lived in Anchorage when I was a kid then, and my dad bought 5 airplanes. Two of them were airworthy. They were 150s and 152s, and he paid 5,000 for the whole lot, five planes. And later on, one of them was a 152 Aerobat. So if you're familiar with it, it's a little airplane, but it's made to be high performance. Um, and he sold that plane a couple of years later uh, for 15 grand. So he bought the whole lot for 5,000, sold one plane for 15. I think he sold the other one for 12. Um, and so, yeah, if your timing's right, yeah, you can get stuff on the cheap.
Yeah, it won't necessarily align the way that you want it to, though. Like you got to
Right.
be, and that. So yeah, those opportunities exist for a lot of the
Mhm.
folks. Though they'd place their bets on, well, Bitcoin's going to be worth $50,000 a Bitcoin when things go
Mhm.
to heck,
Mhm.
and well, that didn't happen.
Right.
Well, what if $50,000 only buys you what 50 cents buys you today?
Mhm.
Yeah, by the time it does hit that,
Then you should have bought more Bitcoin.
Yeah.
best time to buy a Bitcoin is about 10 years ago.
Yeah, and again, it's like unless one of the guys talked about everything getting shut down. So if you outlaw encryption, there goes the value of and nobody can use it legally. There goes the value of your bitcoins. You can still have them, but the price is going to drop. and there's already precedence for confiscating gold, and cash is going away. And so it's this idea that there's a big funneling into, Fed coin or whatever is next. And in that case, you have to split your wealth between some kind of like physical good and properties, but you're going to lose some of those as well, because if your properties are spread out, you're going to lose some of them. And you talked about rentals being bought up by large corporations, and all the small, the people that have a house or two, with the, it's like they get priced out, they get pushed out of the market. And even legislation that's favorable to renters allows the property to basically be taken over. So you can't hold
Already
on
happened.
to, yeah, yeah, can't hold on to it all.
Right. Yeah, and the Fed coin is definitely coming. It was already introduced in a bill, and then Trump actually pulled it out. So just give him credit for that for now. But once that's in place, then you're going to the electronic currency, and that's going to, that'll be the movement to away from the dollar as a reserve currency and toward a basket of currencies out of the IMF, where Fed coin is just one of those currencies, and it's completely, your access to it is completely controlled by the state at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so that'll be the shift over, rather than the hyperinflation in the U.S., just the shift over. But we're no longer using the paper dollars, so you have a period of time to trade them in for Fed coin. Um, and so then your choice, because becomes, do you want to trade them in for Fed coin? Do you want to trade it in for gold, for crypto, for the local currency in another country? What is it
Property,
that you
buy
want to do
something.
with it? Property, yeah. But of course, you don't want to buy it in a place like Russia 1920, where Stalin's going to come and confiscate it and put you in a gulag if you resist. So,
Or a nice
uh,
apartment if you don't.
right, right. Yeah, and maybe in 80 years it'll get privatized, right? You can privatize your apartment.
Yep.
So, but at this point, it's Martin Armstrong likes to point out that this is the collapse of socialism, and it sounds ironic or contradictory, but what's being pointed out is that socialism only exists as long as you have other people's money to spend. Well, Europe doesn't have any money left to spend. It's collapsing. They can't pay for their programs. Same is going to be true with the U.S. They can't pay for their programs. So what then? So right now you're seeing kind of the last hurrah of socialism, and it's going to be like you came back from hunting at your cabin, and you went in and you found a wolverine in the corner, and the only thing you could do was shoot it in the middle of the eye, in the middle of in between the eyes. Um, I say that because that's actually something that happened to my uncle. He'd like to talk about. But yeah, I mean, socialism is a rabid animal. Um, when it was, it's either the Soviet Union or China, where they massacre millions of people to pay for their program, or like in Sweden or someplace like that, where they have a limited socialism, and it simply exists as a parasite off the back of their capitalism. And so once the capitalism is shut down and they try to move to socialism as a primary system, then it's going to be absolutely murderous. It's going to be a rabid animal, and there's nothing left for it to exist off of. There's been I don't know if it's a theory or a fact. It's gone around since the early 20th century that the communism of the Soviet Union was funded by Western governments. And so, was it simply existing off the backs of capitalist or market-based societies in order to control the region? Um, but what happens when there's no longer any market? under the Green New Deal. There's no market there. What happens when there's no market left to support it, and it just turns into the Wolverine, and it's backed into a corner? Well, it's either going to come at you or you shoot it in between the eyes.
Well, all the stops come out, and I think we're seeing the beginning of that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, what would
this
you do in a
huh?
situation like that? Well, I was just thinking Napoleon Dynamite and his uncle, they shot like 50 of them with a shotgun.
Yeah, I mean
What do you
that's
guys think, Mike?
yeah.
Mike, what's the difference between the Bolsheviks, the people during the Soviet Revolution,
Mm-hmm.
like the actual people, the boots on the ground, and the boots on the ground today? What kind of people were the Bolsheviks?
That's
The
interesting.
communist revolts. Who were those people? I just
They
was wondering, can we compare who they were compared to who they are now?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of them were they were ne'er do wells. Okay, there was a lot of them were nihilists, for example. They were in such a philosophical disarray. They believed that clothing was materialistic, and so they shouldn't have to wear clothing. Uh, I mean, how does that? Can you see a parallel there to what you have today with, um, a transgender movement and the various group rights movements that call for the state to recognize them in a special way and claim that it's a natural right? And so they're people who are upset about something. It's as if they have to be upset about something. They need something to be angry about in their lives, and so they grab onto something that we would consider ridiculous, and so they're out protesting in, uh, you know, dressed as the opposite gender and etc. But um, there were also, the so-called anarchists, but they were of a mindset that they didn't understand private property because it wasn't part of the culture, and so everyone else's property belonged to them, and they didn't believe in a state that would enforce the protection of any property, uh, because, uh, well, and that becomes similar to the patriarchy. Bring down the patriarchy that you hear, right? So,
Well,
um,
yeah, you are right. I was just wondering, do the socialists of today,
mhm,
because most of them that I see, they're just a bunch of dumb punks.
mhm.
Do they have the fortitude to put on a socialist revolution like the Bolsheviks did?
No, because they're controlled from the
Because
top. They're, that those people were, the loyal ones were promoted and they got to do some roundups and executions, but they were, later, they were put on trial um, uh, uh, for treason. People just get
right,
rounded up for treason, right? And so the same thing would happen. Uh, they think that they're in charge of a communist revolution at the moment, but in the end, they're going to get put down by the people who are really running it, who are really paying for it. They're just useful idiots,
right.
and they're
There
out there
just
to
seems to be a
cause
lot more
chaos.
useful idiots this go.
Hmm.
It's critical mass. They've hit critical mass.
They do.
Uh, um,
This
in brother
this book, the Dictators Handbook.
dictators.
One of the first rules, if you're running a revolution, is that you kill off everyone who was in the first wave of it, because your debt
Hmm.
to them is too much to pay. If you're the ruler, um, all the first, second lieutenants in the revolution, um, firing squad, and otherwise they once you're in power, then they'll come asking for favors. So you
Hmm.
got to get rid of them.
Right, and also the people who are out in the streets, they're, a lot of them at least, are ideologues, and a communist revolution, the communist dictator doesn't want ideologues. They might get some idea in their head, that doesn't agree with what the dictator says. They just want what they want are pliable, willful sheep who will do whatever the dictator says.
Right.
They
Most of the
follow
time,
along.
the dictator has no, and most of the time, the dictator has no ideology except for his
Mhm.
power.
Right.
He doesn't. He's not so much concerned about the little nuances of political theater.
Hmm.
What the difference is between National Socialism and communism is. He just
Hmm.
wants to be the guy in charge.
Yeah, I could see the Black Lives Matter movement is going to get it's it's going to it's going to get what the Bolshevik revolutionaries got eventually. They're just going to get their head chopped off. Um, they may be the first ones to go to the guillotines that the conspiracy sites talk about, right? Um, but the they'll be the one to bring in the tyranny that will be uh, that will be administered by the medical brown shirts. And so the medical brown shirts, they're not ideologues, but they'll be the tools of the system. And so you have Black Lives Matter and slash Antifa bringing in the system that will be administered by the brown shirts for the dictators.
The medical brown shirts, like you call them, which I think is great, I think
Mm-hmm.
are a little more dangerous because they feel like they have um, a moral superiority because they have science backing them, right? It's always the
Yeah.
science, the science. The president doesn't listen to the science, and you morons that don't wear a mask, you don't read the science, follow the science. I think
Mm-hmm.
they'll be like that C.S. Lewis, the goody two shoe first people that can't do enough good while they're harming everyone,
Yeah,
and then going to bed sleeping good at night, knowing that he did everything he could.
right. Yeah, and that's the gaslighting. That's the oh, you don't listen to science. Well, actually, I look at the numbers. I can look at a graph. I can look at your statistics. We had the same thing going on with the wood stove bans. Remember they're claiming that there's the science says that wood stoves cause an increase in respiratory issues. Well, actually, if you looked at the science, there were 3 studies done, and one of them found a slight increase, although they never get the statistics. Another one in Europe found a decrease, in fact, a negative correlation between smoke and health problems. And the other one found no significant difference. But they never would publish the statistics for those studies that they
So
used to
it's
claim.
pick your science.
Right. So it's yeah. So it's you don't listen to science. Well, why don't you actually provide the information? And so it ends up being a gaslighting uh, event. And so it's the
Yeah,
same thing with this.
it's back to the climate change thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like when they came out, when they told us how deadly coronavirus was. Well, then Italy came out with their numbers, and it was a mortality rate of 0.0023%, and but no one would actually
Italy.
look. Yeah, no one would actually listen to the numbers. And Italy was one of the worst places in the world for the COVID hit.
The I wanna chime in on the Bolshevik thing, and
Hmm.
then I'm gonna bounce. Um,
Yeah.
in Brothers Karamazov, uh, the character Ivan, this is in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. The character Ivan is the prototypical early Bolshevik revolutionary, and that book was written in what, like 1880, something like
Hmm.
that. And Ivan was a European educated, Paris educated student of philosophy. He'd adopted nihilism, and he had all these super airtight arguments. Um, where it was basically, if you read the book and get the character of Ivan, he comes across a lot like the intellectuals behind the current stuff. He's kind of a postmodernist before it was cool. Like nihilists and postmodernists share a lot in common as
Hmm.
far as practically speaking. Nice. Um, so uh, his whole thing is he goes around in the book. He goes around telling people why nothing matters, and why it doesn't matter if you do good. It doesn't matter if you do evil. The world's messed up in any case, and so whatever. And I guess I've read a little bit about the way that the way that the Bolsheviks mobilized enough people to make their movement happen. And the way they did it was there were people like Ivan who were, super educated and had all these really great arguments that were sort of traps. They were sort of logical traps. They would trap you in a fallacy, and then that became your obsession. They would go to pubs in smaller-ish Russian towns and villages and stuff, and they would sit down and they'd say, "Hey, it looks like you're on hard times," and they'd get agreement like, "Yeah, yeah, times are hard. Stuff sucks." And then they'd say, "It doesn't suck for everybody. This isn't a hard time for everybody." And then the people would be like, "Yeah, yeah, it's not a hard time for everybody." And then they'd have this script basically, which is like, "Why is it not a hard time for some people, but it is a hard time for you? Are you worth less than they are? Is this fair?" And they'd get them all wrapped up in this fairness narrative and in this, you've been screwed and the people who have more than you got it at your expense and all that. And they did this for a long time. They did this for like a couple decades. And so when it finally came time for their own little boogaloo there, 1917 or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
they had sort of like a really thin layer philosophical support from all these kind of working class people who had probably been not treated super great by the czar, but had also sort of given up, and then been given an excuse to stop trying. And I think the current movement is really super duper similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people have no idea what they're doing. They're just angry about something, and then they find somebody who gives them an excuse to be
Mm-hmm.
angry, and that inflates the numbers tremendously. And so you don't really need a lot of Marxists or whatever to have a revolution. You just need some disaffected, depressed, isolated people. Nothing better to do that than prescription drugs and a lockdown, and then an excuse to go out and be angry at people who have their stuff more together, either by ill-gotten means or by honest means.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the parallels are pretty stark. I never thought about it as a collapse of socialism.
Mm-hmm.
But that's exactly what it is. It's really funny.
Yeah,
Peterson also talks about the Gini coefficient, and he says there's a conservative argument to be made for not letting income distribution to get too out of whack, because it's destabilizing and by definition not conservative.
yeah. And there,
It drives the cycle that eventually eats it. Yeah.
yeah, and the communist revolution in Russia, it didn't just start once in 1917. There was the 1905 Menshevik Revolution, which failed to get much traction, and then it was later, 10 years later, you have the Bolsheviks, and the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks were essentially the same ideology. There was just a difference in how they were going to be represented in the Russian government, in the new Russian government, and that was about it.
First, you don't succeed, try again.
Right? Yeah, they were such ideologues that they couldn't even agree on how the gang should rule them. So yeah, but they got their
Watch for that.
Right,
too.
right. Yeah. So yeah, watch for. That's another thing. The breakup of the Democratic Party. It's not coherent anymore. You have the center Democrats. You have and the left Democrats, the socialists, and so you have the potential breakup of the Democrat Party. So are you going to see? I don't mean to make it Republican Democrat, but are you going to see a similar event where they can't agree? Remember that on it actually happened in the last election too. Remember they couldn't agree on Hillary or Bernie, and they were all in a fight over Hillary had screwed Bernie at the convention.
Yep.
Hmm.
At the convention.
And so that's going to happen again. But this time, the far left wing of it is far more vocal and violent than it was before. Uh, last time it was Occupy Wall Street people, and it wasn't that big a deal. But this time it's Antifa and that crowd. So we're going to see a lot more action on that, and maybe a breakup of the Democratic Party into something like similar to the Menshevik/Bolshevik discord. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
going to be interesting.
Exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I have to bounce and get my 4th of July barbecue ready. The last Independence Day.
The
I'll
last
see.
Independence Day.
Yeah, that's right.
We're all
20.
dependent now.
We're all depending on you for dinner, Dave. Oh.
Oh yeah. Hopefully not. All I'm gonna have is hot surfaces to prepare food on.
Cool.
But I hope to
Will
see you guys
there
there.
be social distancing practiced?
From the rest
Um,
of Fairbanks, yes.
yeah, from the rest of
Only,
Fairbanks.
only social.
People who will go off in the woods to pee will probably practice social distancing during that.
We'll try to practice social
Yes.
distancing from the mosquitoes.
Sounds good to
Keep
me.
the smoke going on the fire. Okay, we'll see you next week.
All right, have a good one.
That's right. Cool. Well, I'll see hopefully all you guys in.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Oh, there we go. Now we're back. Yeah. See you guys later today, and catch you guys next week for another episode.
All right. Yep.